She swallows the sun every single night. Not metaphor, not poetry, not a bedtime story. The ancient Egyptians watched the sky goddess Nut open her mouth each evening and pull the burning disk of Ra into her body. They watched her stretch across the entire horizon, her fingers touching the east, her toes reaching the west, her star-covered belly arching over everything you could see. And then each morning, she gave birth to the sun again. You are looking at one of the oldest astronomical models in human history, hidden inside a myth. And no one fully understood what it meant until an English astronomer walked into an Egyptian temple in the 1890s and realized the ancient priests had been doing real science the entire time. His name was Sir Norman Lockyer, and he changed everything we thought we knew about Egyptian mythology. In 1894, Lockyer published a book called The Dawn of Astronomy. He had spent years measuring the alignments of Egyptian temples, not their walls or their columns, but the directions their doorways faced, and he discovered something extraordinary. The temples were not built to face random directions. They were built to face specific stars at specific moments in the sky. The Temple of Karnak, for example, is aligned to catch the midsummer sunrise through its central axis. That is not architecture. That is an observatory pretending to be a house of worship. Lockyer realized that the Egyptian priests were tracking celestial events with the same precision as any modern astronomer. They just expressed that knowledge in the language of gods and myths. But to understand how deep this goes, you need to understand who Nut actually was. In Egyptian mythology, Nut was the sky itself, not a goddess who lived in the sky. The sky. Her body was the firmament, her limbs were the horizon. Her skin was covered in stars, literally painted with them on tomb ceilings across Egypt for over 2,000 years. Every evening she swallowed the sun god Ra. Ra would travel through her body during the night, through 12 dangerous hours, past serpents and monsters and the dead, and emerge from her womb at dawn. You probably heard this and thought it was just a creation story, a poetic way of explaining sunrise and sunset. But here is what you were not told. The Egyptians divided the night into 12 hours, not arbitrarily. They used the stars to do it, and they tracked those stars using a system called the decans, 36 specific star groups, each one rising above the horizon at roughly 10-day intervals throughout the year. By watching which decan was rising, a trained priest could tell you exactly what hour of the night it was. No clock, no sundial, just stars and knowledge passed down across generations. Otto Neugebauer, the Austrian-American historian who spent decades studying ancient astronomy, confirmed that the Egyptian decan system was one of the earliest known forms of stellar timekeeping. It was precise, it was systematic, and it was embedded directly into the myth of Nut. Think about that. The 12 hours of Ra's journey through Nut's body, the 12 hours of the night, correspond to the 12 divisions the Egyptian astronomers actually used. The monsters Ra encounters in each hour. Those are the decans, the dangerous serpent Apophis who tries to devour the sun. That is the constellation Hydra, stretching across the winter sky, positioned exactly where the myth says the danger is. This was not random storytelling. This was a mnemonic system, a teaching tool, a way to encode astronomical data into a narrative that anyone, even someone who could not read, could memorize and pass on. But the myth of Nut was not just about time, it was about prediction. Every year, without exception, the Nile River flooded. And every year, without exception, that flood saved Egyptian civilization. The water brought fertile black soil called Kemet, the very word Egypt used for itself. Without the flood, there was no agriculture. Without agriculture, there was no Egypt. So how did they know the flood was coming? They watched for a star. The Egyptians called it Soptit. You know it as Sirius, the brightest star in the night sky. Every year in mid-July, Sirius would appear on the eastern horizon just before dawn. This is called a heliacal rising, heliacal meaning of the sun, because the star briefly becomes visible in the glow of morning light before the sun overwhelms it. And within days of that first sighting, the Nile would flood, every single year. The Egyptians built their entire calendar around this event. The heliacal rising of Sirius marked the first day of the first month of the year. It was New Year's Day. And the goddess who embodied Sirius was Soptit, often depicted as a woman with a 5-pointed star above her head, sometimes identified as a form of Isis, sometimes as the female counterpart of Orion, whom the Egyptians called Sa. The connection between Sirius, the Nile flood, and the Egyptian calendar was so precise that when Jean-François Champollion deciphered hieroglyphs in the 1820s, he found astronomical texts that confirmed the alignment. The priests had been recording heliacal risings, solstices, and planetary movements for centuries, on temple walls, in tombs, on coffin lids. And then there is the Dendera zodiac. In the ceiling of a temple at Dendera in Upper Egypt, there is a circular star map. It shows the 12 constellations of the zodiac, the same ones you recognize from modern horoscopes, arranged in a ring around figures of Egyptian gods. It dates to roughly 50 BC, but the astronomical knowledge it contains is much older. When Napoleon's scientists saw it in 1799, they were stunned. They removed it from the ceiling and shipped it to Paris, where it still sits in the Louvre today. The Dendera zodiac is the oldest complete planisphere, a flat map of the stars ever found. It predates every comparable European star chart by centuries. And it is a mythological image, gods and sacred animals arranged among the constellations. Science dressed in the language of religion. This is the pattern you keep finding when you look closely at Egyptian mythology. The stories are not primitive explanations for things the Egyptians did not understand. They are sophisticated systems for storing and transmitting astronomical knowledge in a form that could survive across generations, even across centuries, without writing. Here is where it gets truly strange. In 2000, a Cambridge astronomer named Kate Spence published a paper in the journal Nature that proposed a new theory about how the Great Pyramids of Giza were aligned. For centuries, people wondered how the ancient builders achieved such near-perfect cardinal alignment, north, south, east, west, without a compass of any kind. Spence argued they used stars. Specifically, 2 stars in the constellation Ursa Minor, Kochab and Mizar, that would have lined up almost perfectly with true north around 2500 BC. The slight misalignments in the pyramids actually matched the stellar positions of different dates, suggesting the builders were calibrating against the same pair of stars over time. If she is right, and the mathematical evidence is compelling, then the same civilization that told you nuts swallowed the sun was also tracking circumpolar stars with enough precision to orient multi-million-ton stone structures to within a fraction of a degree. Why hide astronomical knowledge inside stories about gods? Because myths survive, empires fall, libraries burn, languages die, but a story about a goddess swallowing the sun. That gets told to every child, every night, forever. The astronomical data rides inside the narrative like a passenger inside a car. As long as the story keeps being told, the knowledge keeps being transmitted. This is something you still do today, even if you have never thought about it. When you say the days of the week, you are reciting Norse mythology. Thursday is Thor's day, Saturday is Saturn's day. When you look at the constellation Orion, you are using a Greek name for an Egyptian god. The myths never left. They are still doing what they did for the Egyptian priests, encoding knowledge into stories that humans cannot stop telling. The Egyptian myth of Nut predicted modern astronomy not because the ancient priests had telescopes. They predicted it because they understood something that modern scientists are only now rediscovering. That observation, pattern recognition, and careful record-keeping can reveal the structure of the cosmos without a single piece of technology. She swallows the sun every night, and every morning she gives it back. You were told this was a fairy tale. It was actually a textbook,